When you think of a camera's legacy, what comes to mind? Is it the iconic design and form factor? Is it the photographer who has used it? Or the images it has helped create? Now I know that there are more than those three elements when it comes to defining legacy. But if we look objectively, Hasselblad checks all the boxes and has solidified itself as an iconic and legacy brand in the photography space. And today, we're looking at its next chapter, the CFV 100C. And while we review this camera in today's video, I want us to ask the question, does this camera carry on the legacy of its predecessors? Or does it fall flat in the digital age? All you need for today's video is an open mind and a curiosity about the Hasselblad CFV 100C. So if you have those two things, I think it's time we got started. My name is Andrew. Welcome to the Lens Rentals channel. There are three categories that I want to dive into today while reviewing the Hasselblad. The first being the overall user experience, specifically what to look out for when you're renting this camera when it comes to the UI, the ergonomics, and the workflow. The second thing I want to do is dive into the photos themselves. We have a 100 megapixel medium format sensor with 14 and 16-bit depth color options. So clearly we have to dive into the images. We're gonna go through a few, and I'm gonna review the settings that I had on the camera, as well as the overall experience and how I got the image the way that I wanted it to look. And lastly, after we gather all of this info, I wanna give you my honest opinion on the camera. Who is it for? What's it best at? And should you rent it or buy it? And then together, we're gonna try to decide whether or not this camera carries on the legacy of Hasselblad. Now I've got timestamps down below, so you guys can jump to the conclusion or a topic that interests you the most, though I do recommend you stick around and watch the whole thing, only because it makes me happy. And on that note, I do want to give you one thing, and that's a brief history lesson. My friends, class is in session. The Hasselblad you know and love today started as the brainchild of Swedish inventor Victor Hasselblad. And the original reason why he invented them was because he wanted a camera that he could use to photograph nature and wildlife while also being comfortable in his hand. And that is something you should write down because we're gonna have a quiz on that later on. Over time, he tweaked and perfected his designs, which brings us to the iconic Hasselblad 500C, a post-World War II camera that found itself in the hands of professionals and amateurs alike. Then in 1962, everything changed when Hasselblad found itself leaving our earthly orbit by becoming the first camera ever to go into space and photograph, space stuff. And from there, it's history. Hasselblad has solidified itself in the hands of prominent photographers, and it has taken photos of very prominent figures itself. So it's clear, looking at the history, that Hasselblad really has established itself as a legacy camera brand. And with that, class is dismissed. Diving into the camera's UI, its workflow, and its overall experience, there are a few things that I have to point out as quirks. Things that really caught me off guard and left me scratching my head. You see, I get my hands on a lot of different camera brands, a lot of different menu systems, a lot of different ergonomical, bodies in my hand. And honestly, this is the first camera in a long time that's actually stumped me. And it's a little embarrassing. Looking at the form factor and the UI for this camera, it really is beautiful and classic. You've got a giant 3.2 megapixel screen on the back that gives you all of your data. While there's no traditional viewfinder, you can get an attachment, which is nice. It kind of attaches to a little base plate on the top of the camera. But I found myself only really using the flip out LCD screen, which kind of harkens back a little bit to that old school, like top down waist level viewfinder that Hasselblad is known for. A few weeks ago, I was in Oakland with my friend Jordan. We were doing a documentary. He's a phenomenal DP and a fellow YouTuber, so y'all make sure to go check him out. And I got to bring the camera with me and put it through its paces. And the one thing I found right off the bat was that while the camera is truly a beautifully designed piece of equipment, ergonomically, it is kind of a nightmare in your hand. Now, this all depends on the lens you put on the front of the camera, obviously. But the longer the lens, the heavier the lens, the stranger things feel. The lens wants to pull the camera forward. It feels off balance in your hands. And ultimately, if you are just hand holding it without a grip or without a neck strap, your hands get tired very quickly because it does feel very strange. I found myself kind of holding the body and trying to keep the lens here, which is more natural, but there's no side grip without the attachment. And so you're holding it like this. It's kind of weird. It's just a different approach. The number one remedy to this is obviously use a neck strap. I took mine off because I never like to use neck straps, and I regret that. You gotta use one with this camera. It will feel more natural, it will help alleviate some of that hand pain, and if you really wanna take it a step further, you can add a hand grip, though I will say the hand grip also feels not great in the hand, at least not in my hands. One quick note on the look before we move on to more of the UI is that this camera, if we're talking about legacy, it's an iconic design. And everyone, photographer, non-photographer, anyone who saw me using that camera paused. I could see them watching me, and then they'd either come up to me or they'd say to their friends, "That's a Hasselblad." So in regards to like it being an icon, it very much captured the attention of a lot of people. Moving on to the UI, this is where I get the most embarrassed because we live in a day and age where our iPhones become second nature to us. Long press, short press, swipe, left, right, up, down, whatever it may be. These things are just part of our everyday lives. So tell me why, when I got the Hasselblad in my hand, I struggled with the menu system for 2 weeks. I didn't look at a manual. I know it's on our website, but I don't know. I just like to get in, I like to learn things for myself. That's on me. But here's the deal, both Jordan and I, while we were using the camera in Oakland together, still struggled to figure out how to use certain settings. For example, the shutter button itself is on the front of the camera and it has this nice crown design around it. Now this crown is one of its 3 manual controls on the camera. You don't have a lot of those manual tactile buttons and dials to play with and adjust your settings with. So I was surprised to find out that I could actually turn that crown around the shutter button and actually change settings in my camera. So then Jordan and I got to thinking, well, surely you should be able to customize this button to change whatever you want. And while there is not a customized button that we could find, there is a button that allows you to adjust another setting. Simply holding down a button that looks like a metal rivet allows you to change your next settings. The next thing I want to talk about is the touch controls. So the back screen is awesome, but one thing I was having a really hard time with was figuring out how to change my settings quickly on the go. Before I even learned about the manual controls, I was having to go in and swipe up on the camera, tap the setting I want to change, shutter speed, ISO, aperture, whatever it may be, scroll, and once I scrolled and found the one that I wanted, I'd select it and then take the photo. It took me 2 weeks to figure out that you could simply tap the setting on the LCD screen to change your settings. I don't know why, it just did not come naturally to me. With every other camera brand, you have to essentially activate the screen in order to then go into those settings. And Hasselblad is alleviating that problem by allowing you to simply tap and adjust, either by using your finger or using the crown on the shutter button. And this is a complaint. This is also kind of a nod to them because honestly, they're forward thinking here. This was really nice once I figured it out. I was embarrassed. Like I said, don't judge me too much. But when you're in the zone and you're used to using other cameras, you just have come to expect a certain experience when it comes to using cameras. Okay, now you can judge me. Go ahead. When it comes to talking about the photos that this camera can help you create, it's hard not to sing its praises. The 100 megapixel medium format sensor is simply phenomenal. It reminds me so much of the Fuji GFX system, but with the Hasselblad color science and the 14 and 16-bit depth color options, it's just a different experience, though you're still getting the same quality that you can come to expect with any digital medium format camera. As I was figuring out what this camera likes when it comes to exposure, I did find that exposing about 1 to 1.5, almost 2 stops to the left really helped it shine because it could pull back so much data in those shadows. This camera did feel very sensitive in the highlights, so that's something that you need to watch out for. So I just exposed for the highlights moving forward after this day. Every camera handles things differently. Some cameras seem to have perfect roll-off when it comes to highlights. This camera felt a little bit more sensitive to that. One thing I want to make sure I note about the 14 and 16-bit depth color options is that when you choose one or the other, the file sizes are going to remain the same. So there's no point in my mind to choose 14-bit depth color when you have 16-bit depth. If the file sizes are going to be the same, you might as well just go for it. On the second day of filming, we were in midday sun around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So obviously we're going to have really harsh light, top-down light. It's going to create a lot of weird shadows. I thought this camera handled it really well. There's no internal ND. I didn't actually have any ND filters on my camera, but I still think that, again, when I was able to expose properly, the image came out looking really great. The ISO sensitivity range on this camera is base at 64, and it can go all the way up to 25,000 ISO. So this next setting setting in a recording studio, I was really going to have to utilize a higher ISO to get the image that I wanted. I do believe that this is where I had the hardest time just figuring out what I wanted the camera to do and how I wanted it to help me create the image that I was looking for. Though once I kind of found out where this camera liked to live, things started to really come together. It's important for me to note that I used a wide variety of the Hasselblad XCD glass, which is really nice. It feels great in the hand. It's built really well. I thought it was kind of crazy that the lens hood themselves are actually this metal. It's like a matte finish on it, so it's very substantial, very different than the Canon lens hoods that you get with like the 15-35 or anything like that. I stuck with the 30 and the 85mm glass and really found myself gravitating towards the 85mm with this camera. 30 was just a little bit too wide for me, but 85 felt just right. Looking at how these photos stacked up against other photos that I've taken with digital medium format cameras, it didn't make me think any differently about any other digital medium format camera that I've used in the past. Now, this could be viewed as a con, but I kind of view it as a good thing. Just like any APS-C censored camera or full frame camera, you kind of have grown to expect what that image is going to look like. And it's good to make sure that cameras hit those benchmarks. I will say that there is something really special about this image in particular. I don't know what it is. Don't quote me on this. I feel like these cameras might share the same sensors as the Fujis. I'd have to look into that. If you guys want to let me know down below, that'd be great. But I believe it's the quality of the sensor with the glass that I was using that I think really brought these images to life. And obviously, if you can adapt other lenses onto it, vintage glass, then I'm sure you'd be able to create some pretty magical images. So let's wrap things up by talking about my final thoughts on this camera, who I think it's for, what I think it's best at, where I wouldn't bring it, and then I gotta answer the question, does this carry on the legacy of Hasselblad? Is this the next iteration of the iconic cameras that we've all grown to know, love, and respect? First things first, this camera, after I got through all of the quirks, after I got over my user errors and my negligence with the manual, this camera became a joy to use, and the images it produced were awesome. At the end of every set day, we just got home, I'd plug my camera in, get my images, and it was awesome. I could dive right into the edit. The 100 megapixel 16-bit depth RAW files really allow you just to have a ton of fun in the edit to create what you're looking for, and it's a joy. It's really a joy. And that brings me to the quiz question I had for you. Do you remember why Victor Hasselblad developed the camera in the first place? It was because he wanted something to be easy to use and hold while taking photos out in nature. And because of my ergonomic issues, I feel like that's a big question mark that I have for this camera body and for this series as they move forward as a whole. It's not comfortable in the hand. I'm sorry. You might think that I'm wrong, and that's okay, but I used it for a month straight in my hands. It's an awesome camera, but without the hand grip, without the strap, I don't find it to be very comfortable to use. I think the key difference here is those early models, the 500C, the CM, they're longer bodies. There's more camera to kind of hold onto when you're taking your photos. I think this camera thrives on sticks and in studio. Would I bring this for quick BTS photos again on a production set? Probably not. There are a lot of creators who love this camera, and that is completely correct. They should love this camera. You should love this camera. Just know what you're getting into when you rent it. I wouldn't recommend it if your days are jam-packed and you don't have a lot of time to get the shots that you want. All right, let's talk about legacy, because this is where I get really turned up and kind of get into my head about thinking about this camera. Because on one hand, it's hard for me to imagine another camera becoming as iconic as the 500C, 500CM series. Those cameras are legendary. We still want them. We scour eBay for them. They're thousands of dollars. So when I look to our present, I think of our future with Hasselblad. I kind of wonder whether or not these cameras will have that same effect. With so many other competitors out there who are doing medium format in a way that feels very new and fresh, I wonder if these bodies are really meant for the digital age. That is until I really started using the camera, and then I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. Talking to Jordan every morning after he got to use it, he just kept saying, dude, I love this camera. And I felt the same way. I love this camera. I think at the end of the day, the very cool thing about this, and maybe where they're headed in the future, is that this camera is trying to bring the old into the new and establish a new expectation for us as photographers. There are two things that I didn't mention. The first thing is that there is no video capabilities in this camera. I'm so glad Hasselblad didn't stick video features into this camera. That tells me that they are thinking of photographers first, which is desperately needed in today's industry and the future. We cannot forget the value of simply focusing on photography. It's my biggest complaint with the X100C. Why put video features in that camera? Make it purely photo. I think that's amazing. And the second thing I failed to mention to you is that you can adapt this camera to the older 500C bodies. And I didn't really get to spend a lot of time doing this. I ran out of time with the camera. It was just a whole thing. But I have to say that connecting the camera, seeing that you can utilize it, and though there are some quirks you need to work around, of course, it's pretty seamless and pretty cool to be able to use your vintage glass that you have with your OG Hasselblad 500C, 500CM body. And that right there, I think, solidifies it for me as a camera that maybe will help continue the legacy of Hasselblad. Maybe not as a flagship camera, maybe not as a camera that people will talk about and get so many years down the road, but it will go down and support Hasselblad's legacy of being for photographers. And for that, I have to applaud them. If you stuck around this long, I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so you can help us out, help me out. And don't forget to get your hands on this camera. Link down below if you want to test it out for yourself. All right, I'll see you in the next one, my friends. Peace.